Welcome, everyone, to today's platform for the American Ethical Union and all the ethical culture and ethical humanist societies that are part of its network. Today's platform is being sponsored by the Ethical Humanist Society of Long Island. My name is Richard Coral, and I'm the leader of the Long Island Society as well as the New York Society. But I grew up here over past the nearby Roosevelt Shopping Center, so I'm native to this territory. For those of you who want to get a sense of territory where we are, if you remember the Billy Joel song about cruising the Miracle Mile, that's just a few miles north of here. But of course, we're principally on Zoom today, so we are everywhere, and we are at your society too. It's great to see that we already have several hundred people logged on and listening in. So once again, welcome to everyone. I so enjoy these joint platforms and the other national AAU events where so many of our people from around the country can get together and appreciate the whole national movement that ethical culture and ethical humanism can be. As it nears its 150th anniversary, it is only just beginning to realize its potential and to fulfill its purpose. The ethical movement was founded as a community of people who do not need to devote time to miracle creation stories, but instead are concerned with how we can live together in peaceful communities, how we can live in tune with the nature of which we are a part, and how we can best increase our understanding of the universe in which we have been born. We speak of ethics as the central theme of our own journeys because ethics is the study and the practice of living together in enabling the human spirit to thrive and grow, where equity, justice, democracy, and sustainability are values that guide us in our daily lives and in our public policies. Well, the United Nations Health Agency just reported that in 2 weeks' time, we're expected to pass the 8 billion mark in global population. Now, when I was born, the global population was some 2.5 billion. So, in just my lifetime, the human population more than tripled. We're expected to reach 10 billion in about 25 more years. The challenges that such a population growth represents, the demands made on the earth, the resulting climate change, the competition for space, the vast population movements to come, this will challenge our social contracts and our capacity to support ourselves and each other. What can give us hope and confidence before a future so challenging? We have to learn to share burdens and cooperate on a scale unseen before this. Ethical culture and its focus on ethics as a way of life can bring hope to the world. Whether it knows it or not, the rest of the world will have to learn real soon that selfishness and heedless growth will only breed chaos. But ethical culture, in another name maybe, but in essence, a philosophy of ethics, is needed now more than ever. It can bring people together rather than set people apart. It can help people build with creative change and positive cooperation rather than power and competition. We can be proud of the history of ethical culture's social action of the past, and we must be yet more engaged as we go forward to serve as models and leaders for an ethical way of being. May it be so. Now we'll have a reading of a poem by Napoli, the president of the Long Island Society and facilitator of its poetry circle.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to read a poem called O Ship of State by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I'd just like to share with all of you that Longfellow was not only a poet, but an ardent abolitionist and patriot. What I'll read to you now, O Ship of State, was actually an added stanza to a much longer descriptive poem he had just written and sent to his publisher in 1849. That poem is called The Building of the Ship. Over time, O Ship of State has become a metaphor for love of country. According to history, At the beginning of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln quoted these lines and broke down in tears when he finished. Also, at the beginning of World War II, Franklin D. Roosevelt sent these lines to Winston Churchill, who carried them with him and often read them in his broadcasts to the British citizens. O ship of state, thou too sail on, O ship of state. Sail on, O Union strong and great. Humanity with all its fears, with all the hopes of future years, is hanging breathless on thy fate. We know what master laid thy keel, what workman wrought thy ribs of steel, who made each mast and sail and rope, what anvils rang, what hammers beat, in what a forge and what a heat were shaped the anchors of thy hope. Fear not each sudden sound and shock, 'tis of the wave and not the rock. 'Tis but the flapping of the sail and not a rent made by the gale. In spite of rock and tempest's roar, in spite of false lights on the shore, sail on, nor fear to breast the sea. Our hearts, our hopes are all with thee. Our hearts, our hopes, our prayers, our tears, our faith triumphant o'er our fears, are all with thee, are all with thee.
Thank you, Linda. We have a custom at the Long Island Society that we would like to share with you. Every Sunday platform, we take a minute, maybe two, to stop for a silent reflection. We ask that you also take this brief interval to reflect silently on those people who have helped you come to this place in life, those on whom you relied in your journey, as well as those whom you helped to bring forward in their lives. We might think of how these people brought out the best in us and how you can and how you do bring out the best in those with whom you are interconnected. Well, I am proud, honored, and delighted to introduce our speaker today. Russ Feingold has a history of accomplishments and engagements that would make a bio all day to recite. But today he is here as president of the American Constitution Society. However, I will say that Russ Feingold served as the United States Senator for Wisconsin from 93 to 2011, which sounds like 3 terms if my arithmetic is correct. And for the preceding 10 years was a Wisconsin state senator. More recently, he served as a U.S. Special Envoy to Central Africa. Mr. Feingold became a national household name for the McCain-Feingold Act, which brought forth a major campaign finance reform, and he co-created this with a Republican, Senator John McCain. And in fact, he was ranked among the highest in the Senate for bipartisan voting, a feature that would make him a relic eligible for the American Museum of Natural History today. But Mr. Feingold was also well known for his opposition to the Iraq War and for being the Senate's leading opponent of the death penalty. He's contributed regularly to various publications such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian. He appears frequently on MSNBC and CNN. Mr. Feingold holds a BA from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, an MA from University at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, and a JD from Harvard Law School. Mr. Feingold will speak today, among other things, about the American Constitution Society and what it does to protect our democracy. We heard a great deal about the Federalist Society, which promotes the appointment of conservative judges. So is the American Constitution Society its progressive counterpart? Mr. Feingold, welcome to our platform.
I want to thank Wayne Outen for his suggestion that we do this. And I want you to know it's not the first time I've ever been before an ethical humanist group. It's interesting you mentioned John McCain, because he and I had a fantastic time in your New York building. I think it's on the Upper West Side, if I'm not mistaken. And we were given an award. And if I'm not mistaken, I enjoyed the sort of reference to my being a relic. I got a kick out of that. Anyway, it meant a lot to me and John as we were trying to do our bipartisan work. And what a great society it is. At this time in our history, I can't think of anything more important than expressing the values you're expressing. And I like to think that the American Constitution Society is very much in the same spirit. And in particular, from the point of view of the law and society, the rule of law, and the fact that the law should be about everyone, protecting everyone in the 21st century, in this diverse country in which we live. So we're not just the counterpart to the Federalist Society, but it is certainly correct that one of the reasons the organization, the American Constitution Society, was created 21 years ago was in response to the effect of the right sort of commandeering the legal system, leading up to the decision in Bush v. Gore, where most legal observers feel that the election was handed to George Bush really on a completely partisan basis. It was generally viewed as one of the worst legal decisions in American history. But the right had worked through the Federalist Society for 20 years to try to engineer a very different approach to the law. It is an ideological, political approach to the law that is based on what we believe are really spurious claims to follow the original intent of the founders of the country. So the organization was founded in 2001 by people like Ron Klain, who is now President Biden's chief of staff. And it originally was to counter the intellectual ideas of the right with regard to the Constitution that were so troubling. But as the organization has evolved, it now really has three, I think, interrelated and I think symbiotic purposes. Number one is to challenge the notion that the Constitution should be hamstrung and interpreted only to fit what was going on in 1787 or 1789. We reject that. We believe that the Constitution has to live and breathe, and we believe that the founders wanted exactly that. George Washington said at the time that he would support the Constitution only because he knew it could be changed, and that he did not think that his generation would have any greater wisdom or ability to understand things than future generations. The quote to that effect is right on the wall in the Philadelphia National Constitution Center. When you go in where all the statue of all the founders are, that's the quotes that's chosen. So we believe that the founders wanted the Constitution to be interpreted and adapted to the world we live in. And that, of course, is not the approach of the far right. So that is the intellectual part of it. The second, though, developed over time, and it's very important. We have 250 chapters across the country. We have a chapter in almost every law school in the country. I just visited a number of them, from Virginia to Chicago to Philadelphia to California to Portland. And we have 50 some lawyer chapters. So people that have graduated law school get together and try to advance a progressive vision of the law through their legal work. And these chapters often work together. So it ends up being essentially the only real overall progressive network of progressive lawyers that organizes at the law school level, the local level, and goes all the way up to the national level, including our efforts directly with the current White House to try to get particularly progressive judges on the bench, which I will talk about in a few minutes. So this network is critical to countering the way in which the right has infected the legal system and our democracy. And of course, we all know how they have made this even more dangerous in the last couple of years. The third thing that we do is really advocacy. And that's where we work with other groups. We're a 501c3, so we don't endorse candidates. We don't raise money for campaigns, but we do advance issues. We do advance humane treatment of immigrants. We do advance the idea of the rule of law and countering crazy ideas such as independent state legislature theory, suggesting that somehow state legislators can decide who won an election in their state and not the people. We are one of the strongest advocates of having this president commute all the death sentences on federal death row and have joined the International Congress Against the Death Penalty to help encourage President Biden to do that. So that's sort of in our advocacy area, and it's a very important part of what we do. So let me make this a little more concrete to indicate what are our main priorities. Our main priorities for the last couple of years have been to face the reality that Senator McConnell and then Donald Trump as president did terrible damage to the independence of the federal judiciary and the legitimacy of our court system by essentially packing the Supreme Court, which has led to this terrible decision in Dobbs to take away a 50-year precedent guaranteeing a woman's right to choose. And so our goal, even before we knew whether Biden would win or Trump would win, we didn't even know if Biden would be the nominee, we decided that we had to be ready. We had to figure out who are the people that the people of this country in their communities would like to see on the bench, on the federal bench. In other words, not somebody chosen behind closed doors by billionaires, the ways the Federal Society does it, but grassroots organizing. So our lawyer chapters went out to their communities, whether it was in San Diego or Atlanta or Lincoln, Nebraska, or wherever it was. And they went to the different groups in the community, to African-American leadership groups, Latino groups, LGBTQ groups, union groups, and others. And they said to them, all right, who would you like to see on the bench? When you go in there as a litigant or as a judge or as a lawyer, who do you want to see on the bench? Who, of course, they often say we'd like to see somebody who looks like us, because there weren't many people like that. And it got much worse under President Trump. And so we were ready after it went the way that, of course, make it more possible to get judges. And we were ready within 5 days of President Biden being declared the winner. Actually, within 2 hours of his being declared president, we sent 400 names to the transition team of diverse, strong people who would be great judges, but also represent the America we live in. So they took this list. And they could have just said, thank you very much, we appreciate it, but that's not what they did. They said, this is really important to us. And so when they became actually in office on January 20th, we began a very dynamic relationship with the White House counsel's office, where we regularly submit the names of people we think would be good judges. And they say to us, well, this is great, but do you know anybody in Wyoming? Do you know a Latina who is qualified and ready to serve on the federal bench in Miami, or whatever it might be? So it's a two-way relationship. And the results have been tremendous. At this point, nearing the end of President Biden's first 2 years in office, they have confirmed 84 federal judges to life term. One more, and it will tie Trump's record at this time. 2 more, it beats it. And it's not just that we have these numbers to reverse the terrible, really narrow nature of the Trump judges. The Trump judges are almost all white men, very lacking in diversity, and in many cases, people that weren't even recommended to be capable or competent by the American Bar Association. But we have already seen this administration doing a great job and getting us up to that 85 number. On the other hand, we are not part of the Biden administration. We criticize them if we think they're not going fast enough. And that's what we recently did. When Senator Schumer, Majority Leader Schumer, a friend of mine, former colleague of mine, decided to send people home and not vote for judges again until early November, we said that's not good. We're losing important ground during these few weeks. And so we are now strongly messaging, this is what our network is doing all over the country. This is what we're doing nationally through things like the New York Times and others. We have set a goal for the administration. We think they should really push hard. The senators should stick around and get this done. Look, I used to be one of the senators that whined to the majority leader, I got to get home. I need a vacation. So I know how it works, but this is exceptional. Trump and McConnell stuck around and did everything they could. And so we are setting a goal for the administration of confirming 30 more federal judges before the end of the year. So you'd have something like 115, which would be one of the highest numbers ever. It's already much faster than almost any administration going all the way back to JFK. So this is crucial. We also believe that it's not enough, that we're going to have to do something more dramatic to prevent the Supreme Court from destroying the rights of Americans where they've already started with the abortion right. They obviously could go to gay marriage. They could go to racial intermarriage and all the different issues where they could take away people's rights. And so we have also become one of the leading organizations calling for something called judicial reform. And what judicial reform means is changing aspects of the Supreme Court to recognize the fact that under McConnell and then under Trump, the Senate and the Senate basically stole the Supreme Court. They stole the seat from President Obama when Justice Scalia died. That was his to choose. And that was by far the longest delay, and they didn't even take up the nomination of Merrick Garland. It was the longest delay by far, a couple hundred days more than the longest in American history. The longest before had been Justice Brandeis, about 126 days. So they packed the court by stealing that seat. And then they did the complete opposite without even looking embarrassed. When Justice Ginsburg died, instead of waiting, they went as fast as they could, even though people were already voting in an election that led to President Biden winning quite handily. And yet they did it. So when you hear people on the right saying the Democrats want to pack the Supreme Court, they already packed it. Our proposals are to return some fairness and legitimacy to the Supreme Court. The goal is not to have progressive domination of the Supreme Court. The goal is to make the Supreme Court a legitimate arbiter of the law, which it no longer is because of this politicization of the court. So we propose 3 categories of changes. The specifics we leave to others. But first of all, we do think it's time to add seats to the United States Supreme Court. That is perfectly legal. It's been done before. It does not require constitutional amendment. It's been 7, it's been 8, it's been 9. We think that this situation cries out for that because what they've done is put 3 50-something, early 50s people in their age on the court, and they'll probably be there for 30 or 40 years, denying current generations the opportunity to have their impact on the law. So that would just require statutory change. And our goal, again, is not to just not to put liberals on the court, but to balance the situation so that it is not a court that is determined to do what Justice Alito clearly indicated, which is they're going to start taking apart the sacred rights of the American people. The second thing is we think it's time to probably put term limits on justices. I never thought I'd say that. I used to believe that, you know, these people are on the level and wisdom and seniority is good, but times have changed. It's become highly political, and it's also a horrible spectacle to see somebody like Justice Ginsburg hanging on when you can see that she was desperately ill and having to just hang on for political reasons. That can't be what the founders of this country intended. That probably requires a constitutional amendment, but it may not. But we support the idea of an 18-year term limit or some other variation. The third is sort of non-structural changes. You know, the Supreme Court doesn't have any ethics rules. The lower federal courts do. So somehow Justice Thomas can sit there and rule on January 6 cases, even though his spouse was completely involved in the whole thing. Makes no sense. We also think that the Senate should change its own rules to make sure if there's a Supreme Court appointment, that it is taken up within a certain period of time, a minimum and a maximum time. So they can't do what Mitch McConnell did to pack the Supreme Court. So that's what we call judicial reform. The other thing I want to mention is we are well aware that this battle for our democracy and for an ethical society is not only at the federal level. It is also increasingly at the state and local level. I don't need to tell you that. All you have to do is turn on your TV, and all the coverage this weekend is about the attempts to subvert our democracy in places like Arizona. And it is absolutely frightening. I'll be turning 70 in a few months, and I could never have imagined throughout my life that this could be an issue. It's incredible to me. Of course, we've heard about voter suppression for years, sadly. That became a big movement of the right starting in 2010, and especially with the so-called Shelby County decision. That's terrible. But this thing nobody had even heard of, election subversion. Trying to get Secretary of States who won't follow the law, trying to let state legislators disregard the vote in a state, disregard the rulings of the Supreme Court, empowering sheriffs to, what they're talking about, a sheriff's constitutional theory, that sheriffs to decide what the Constitution is. Having people in horrible hazmat and riot gear standing next to people when they're dropping off their ballots. This is an all-out assault on our democracy. And the American Constitution Society is in the lead on trying to counter it. They come up with some new tactic every day. But we believe that this time we can't be behind. So we've created something called the Run, Vote, Work initiative, trying to encourage our people and our network to run for these key offices at the local level, whether it's local court, Secretary of State, whatever it might be. Secondly, vote. People have to vote all the way down the ballot. They just can't vote for senator or governor. They got to vote for district attorney. They got to vote for judge. They got to vote for city council. And that's not something people often do. And third is work. They have to make sure that the people who are in these government offices believe in the rule of law, that they're not election deniers. And so we're encouraging our young law students and lawyers and others to consider beginning their careers, or even in the middle of their careers, taking on some of those public jobs, so we can counter this attempt to steal our democracy. The last thing I'll mention, and it's like, I'm hesitant almost to mention it because there's so many things that people are worried about, but it's all part of the same thing. I have written a book recently called The Constitution in Jeopardy with my co-author, Peter Prindiville. It is about the attempt of the right that is coming, something you may not have heard about, although it wasn't in the New York Times recently. And that is that under Article 5 of the Constitution, in addition to Congress being able to propose amendments to the Constitution, it is possible to call a constitutional convention. And the right has been plotting to doing just exactly that for a number of years. All they need is to get 2/3 of the states to petition Congress, apply for a convention. And Congress doesn't get to decide whether it's a good idea. Congress is required to call it. So people like Rick Santorum and former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, and now Steve Bannon, have made this one of their top priorities. If you don't believe me, read The Guardian from last week, where there's an article about Bannon and quotes us in our book, and we've been going around the country talking about it. The American Constitution Society does not think it's wrong in theory to have a convention. We do think having a convention at this time could well be used to destroy the Constitution, because what they'll do is they'll get gerrymandered states and the state legislators from those states to be the delegates at the convention if changes are made in the Congress in the next few days, which is very possible. And so somehow the idea of this convention at this time in this terribly hyper-partisan country can't be allowed. Just to give you an idea of what they have already voted to say they would do, they would grossly restrict the power of the federal government to do anything. They would say Congress would be completely restricted in a way that we can't imagine, so that the government couldn't have responded to COVID. They would greatly restrict administrative agencies' powers. So the Environmental Protection Agency could do basically nothing about climate change or clean water or clean air. They have said that they will make it impossible and unconstitutional to have an income tax. So you can't have a progressive system of taxation. And finally, their favorite one is they want to create what I call the John C. Calhoun system. They want to make it so that if 30 state legislatures, not even the governor or the people of the state, but 30 state legislators decide to vote to overturn a law of Congress or a federal regulation, it would be gone. In other words, they are planning to gut the Constitution, and they may try to do it as early as January by having a resolution claiming that there's already enough applications, which is not true, but they may just claim it, and who will stop them? So people say to me, Russ, you've already got enough to worry about. I say, well, it's better that we know. And let's be clear, all of these things are the same people. This is funded by the Koch brothers and the Mercers. This is coordinated. John Eastman, the guy that was behind January 6th, he's behind this so-called Convention of the States Convention. So don't kid yourself, it's all part of the same plan. And so I think it's essential that we Americans know that what they're trying to do and have the whole picture. It is possible to stop it. by preventing these applications from being approved. And so what it means is your vote in a few days for state legislature may be even more important than your vote for Congress or for the House or for the Senate. So there are many other things I can talk about, but I hope I've given you a little idea of the range of things that we are involved in on a daily basis. It's a dynamic process where we might be talking to the White House in 1 minute. Next minute, we might be saying to our 250 chapters, could you please get the word out that people have to stop this attempt to overtake the Secretary of State's office? And they do programs with distinguished speakers, and we also are on the ground. Under our program here, we have 300 people who have volunteered to be poll workers. We've trained them, and they will be ready to act on election day. And we hope, if that goes well, to greatly expand this program in anticipation of the troubles that are likely to occur in the 2024 election with the presidential election. So this is just an outline of some of the things that we do. And we hope that you will join the organization. You don't have to be a lawyer. As I always say, Doctors Without Borders is one of the most famous organizations and popular organizations for people to support or to join. And they're not all doctors. Well, we're not all lawyers. Everybody needs a doctor. And I guess what we're finding out, if you want to protect our democracy, at some point, everybody needs a lawyer too, in order to fight these battles. There's no way you don't need legal representation and help. And we have a lot of people that want to volunteer their time to help fight for our democracy. So our theme for the year is Democracy's Moment of Truth. And we came up with that title. I didn't know how bad it would be. It's as bad as I can imagine, but that doesn't mean we don't have to get up every day and fight. So that's those are my comments. I hope they were long enough. I can go on and on. As I've said to people before, I'm a trained filibusterer. So if you want me to keep talking, I can, but I'm going to choose not to.
Well, thank you so much, Russ. We really appreciate your joining us this morning. I do have a question, a little bit about the arithmetic of gerrymandering. And we see in certain states like Illinois or Michigan, where a minority of the voters can get a majority in the legislature, and so long as everyone sticks with their party, while the statewide elections would elect a Democrat. So you have this new split. But what about the prospect of ungerrymandering states? Is this like a ratchet system where we'll always get worse because of the legacy? Once someone gets in control and their concept is they're never going to let it go, they can go on.
Well, actually, the number one example of this abuse is my state, Wisconsin. So in 2018, we elected a progressive governor, defeated Scott Walker, progressive lieutenant governor, progressive attorney general, and state treasurer. Won 5 statewide elections. And we lost ground in the state legislature. That's essentially impossible. How can you win a statewide election in all those places and lose ground? Well, it's because they have gerrymandered the state on political grounds. A case was taken all the way to the Supreme Court with regard to the Wisconsin situation, and they struck it down. They said, no, doesn't matter if it's done for political reasons. Well, that's obviously wrong. And now there was a program this weekend about Wisconsin. They think that the Republicans in the state of Wisconsin may be able, with only 44% of the vote, to make the legislature veto proof. In other words, the governor, who's a Democrat right now, he would have essentially no say in anything. This is all, let's face it, it's cheating. Now, the United States Supreme Court ruled in the early 60s in Baker versus Carr and Reynolds versus Sims that malapportionment of state Senate seats and assembly seats in states was wrong. And they made it unconstitutional. That's the idea of one person, one vote. So the districts have to be the same size, right? That they can't do that. But what they do is they mix and match, and they use a computer, which they didn't used to be able to do, to essentially make sure that groups of people, particularly African Americans, have their votes diluted. In Wisconsin, they did this by merging Racine and Kenosha, 2 cities that have significant African American populations, pushing them together so that there would be only one seat that would be have a significant voting block. So this has created a lock, and you're right. How do you undo it? Because you only get to do the reapportionment every 10 years. So they were able to do this again. And what they try to do is make sure it stays locked like this every 10 years, because once it's done for 10 years. So it is a terrible dilemma. And this constitutional convention that I mentioned, it's the same people that would be running it. There would be these people that don't represent the people of the state at all. In Wisconsin, these far right people are a small percentage of the people of the state, but they've used gerrymandering to do it. And it may require some kind of a constitutional amendment to undo this, because the Supreme Court is not touching it, unfortunately.
Yeah, about the Supreme Court, it seems to so many people that it's become really a super legislature with people who just represent a certain point of view. And the whole idea of expanding the court makes it seem as though we're just looking for seats ourselves in this super legislature. We're not adequately represented. But are we losing hope in the concept of judges? Are we assuming that judges will always be mere factotums for a certain group? It always seemed to me that once judges got on the bench, at least on the lower courts, they were acting as judges. It was a different job. They weren't in the legislature anymore.
Now, the goal is not to put a bunch of progressives on the court to balance it. The goal is to put, as you just said so well, people that will act like judges. That is the goal, because we need to return the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. So you could even add a couple of seats and you could make them temporary. You could have them last for 10 or 15 years to see if people could stop politicizing the court. So, I think most of us are old enough to remember when the court didn't look like this at all. Look, I remember that when I was a kid, Brown versus Board of Education, that was written by the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice was a Republican from Bakersfield, California, who was a Republican governor of California. Earl Warren wrote that decision. Justice Brennan, who was easily one of the great progressive Supreme Court justices, revered by almost everybody, was a Republican from New Jersey. And then sometimes somebody that a Democrat appointed was more conservative than some people like. Byron White, Whizzer White, appointed by John F. Kennedy. A lot of the liberals didn't like that. But the point is, we didn't worry about this being political because it looked like it was on the level. It looked like they weren't just following their political preferences, but they were trying to do, as you said, Richard, act like judges. That's what we need. We will never succeed as a nation if we don't have a legitimate judiciary. And so we think these measures have to be taken because of the extreme situation we're in, because it could last for 30 years. But the goal would be to not have to do this if things got straightened out.
Yes, you're right. Byron White, the Democrat appointee, was one of the few dissenters in Roe v. Wade, which was written by a bunch of Republicans.
That's 7-2, right?
Mostly Republicans. Yeah, back then, of course, there was a liberal wing of the Republican Party and a conservative wing of the Democratic Party, because there's, I guess, greater geographic expanse for each of them. But now we're so siloed. We have, like, the magnet has pulled all the different sides to single poles. And so it seems like we're just committed to these contests, not to times of compromise, because people see it's almost a betrayal of their team to speak to the other side. And
yeah, I like to say that people act more like they're going to a Packers game than they're trying to come together as a people. It's almost like the sports view. It's my team or the other team, no matter what, is dominating, and it's silly and it's damaging.
Maybe it's because people don't play poker anymore, because the legend was that in Congress, people would argue during the day, but at night they'd play poker together. Should we introduce something like bridge?
Poker game the whole time I was there.
Well, giving us reason for hope. Russ, we really appreciate the work you're doing, and I think many of us will look into joining and giving support to the work of the American Constitution Society.
Well,
Thank
you're
you
a
so
wonderful
much.
group. Richard, you're a wonderful group, and we're great. I'm so grateful that you're out there doing all this. It's a very important society. Thank you very much, everybody.
All righty, bye then. Well, that was really great. And I'd like to thank Wayne Outen of the Long Island Society, a board member who is a member of the American Constitution Society and a former member of the AEU Law Committee, to make this connection for us and to bring him in. It's true, the New York Society did give an award to Russ and John McCain back back in recognition of the McCain-Feingold Act, which was so earth-shaking at the time, but of course it fell into desuetude in the years since. At this time, we often ask our group for contributions to our society and contributions to maybe another group that we share a mission with to collect money for on their behalf. And today, I'm going to encourage everyone to please make a donation, a contribution to the American Ethical Union. Of course, your own society needs support, but the central network, the clearinghouse, the place where we all get together and share goals and purposes is the focused in the American Ethical Union. So it's very easy to make a contribution going onto the website aeu.org and click on donate money, and it will be greatly appreciated, and you will see the benefits as we go on. Next, on our list is we always have a report from our Social Action Committee. What I'd like to do now really is just tell you a little bit of what's going on at the Long Island Society, and maybe it will reflect some of the things that you're doing in your societies, and maybe it will give you an idea of some things that you might like to share in. One of the big projects that we have a lot of energy devoted to is what we call the Ethical Friends of Children. Since 1985, we've operated a store for children's clothes and furniture, serving as many as 2,500 children a year. It's a store that lets the families come pick out what they need at no cost to them. The stock is donated from individuals and organizations throughout our area, and the families have been referred by social service institutions and other religious and nonprofit organizations. It's operated entirely by volunteers, and some of those volunteers include developmentally disabled persons from another institution who come for a part-time assignment to help store the clothing. This is really a terrific program that we're so proud of. The director, Jim Lopresti, and Pat Spencer and Judy Rosemarin run it, and volunteers throughout the society. So if you would like information about how this operates or what experience they've had, we'll get you in touch with Jim, Pat, and Judy so we can share some of our experience in doing this good work. One other thing that we've been involved in the Social Action Committee with Sonia Aurora and David Sprinson have been educating local state legislatures on the benefits of public banking in order to bring it to New York. Only one state in the union has public banking, to my knowledge, and that means that all of our societies can take this up with their home legislature. Public banking means that all the tax money that is paid into the municipality or state would be deposited not in Chase Bank, where it's invested in corporations in the fossil fuel industry, but it would be devoted to public purposes, local organizations, maybe local mortgages. There's a tremendous asset in the money, the tax money that is just sitting, waiting to be devoted to its prime purpose. If you have more information, like more information about that, uh, I can get you in touch with David and Sonia, and they can give you information on what is being proposed in New York and what can be proposed in your state as well. We have closing words, and then after that, we have an opportunity for some discussion, and I'll talk to you about that. But for closing words, I have two things. One from Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi said, "Truth never damages a cause that is just." So, but also E. Spetter, the leader from the Riverdale Society, wrote the following: "From our deepest resources as human beings, hints are constantly sent into our consciousness, hints of a better life, of a more just society. While listening to these, we may build here and now a world of inner strength, inner beauty, and compassion, rich enough to make us go forward courageously in these precarious times."